Well, a new Falcom shareholder meeting has come and gone, and like always, we've had a few announcements with it this time. Those being the first look at the newest Ys title, Ys 10 Nordics, releasing for PS5, PS4 and Switch, as well as a surprising announcement being Ys Memoire the Felghana, a Switch remaster of the PSP remake of Ys 3. We didn't get any trailers from either of these announcements, but we did get some significant details as well as screenshots that we can pick apart. Getting Ys Memoire the Felghana out of the way first, it's actually just around the corner as it will be releasing in spring of 2023 in Japan. However, it is currently only announced for Switch right now, which is definitely kinda weird on Falcom's part. As for the port itself, it seems like we're getting a best of both worlds kind of scenario, with the visuals of the PC release, but with the additional features like voice acting and a couple more battle mechanics from the PSP version. But there's also a few more additions on top of that, including brand new voiced lines for Adol since he was a silent protagonist before, and much like the Chronicles ports of Ys 1 and 2, there is going to be the ability to toggle between the original art from the PSP and PC release or brand new art that they're making for this one. We unfortunately only got given 2 examples of this new art style change for the character portraits, but I think for the most part they do look pretty good. I do think the original had a bit more edge to it, and it definitely fits with the sort of texture styling of the entire game being this very medievally feeling vibe to it, but I don't think the new art looks bad by any means. It's certainly not a Trails in the Sky Evolution port situation, that's for sure. Something else that's just like the Chronicles ports of Ys 1 and 2 is it's going to have a multitude of different soundtrack settings, allowing you to listen to the original PC version of the Felghana soundtrack or the PC 88 and X6 8000 versions from the original versions of Ys 3. For the most part, you're probably only going to be interested in the default soundtrack, but if you are interested in how certain tracks sounded in the older versions of the game, or you're a hardcore classic Ys fan, then this is definitely going to get some mileage out of you. If it's anything like those Ys Chronicle ports, it's really easy to switch between the different soundtracks, so you can just listen to like 20 seconds of an area's theme if you really wanted to. The final 2 things that they mentioned that they were adding to this version were 2, I'm gonna say quality of life changes, but they don't really seem to feel like it. The first one being a high-speed turbo mode, allowing you to play the game at 1.5 or 2 times speed. However, this isn't a turn-based game, it's an action RPG, a sort of Zelda-like. So I think that being able to speed up time seems like a very weird choice for it, but I won't question Kondo's plan, I suppose. And the other is a beginner-friendly support feature, which is to turn off fall damage, which I personally don't even remember being part of the game, so I don't imagine it being a huge part of the game. I think it's mostly for when you fall through an area and fall into the area below it within a dungeon. Either way, the option's there, and it will probably add a new speedrun category, so, you know, that's a thing. Now, one final thing I want to say about this release is I'm not entirely sure when we're going to get it. While it is coming out in Japan of spring of next year, it did take Ys Memories of Celceta an entire year to come out over here in the West, when that game was already fully translated by Xseed. Now, I know this is probably due to Falcom's entire thing of not letting companies work on the games until they've actually come out in Japan, so that probably delayed a lot of that process. But even so, a year is still a pretty long time to bring out a game that you've already fully translated. And all of this is bearing in mind if Xseed are even the ones to translate it. When it released originally in the West on PSP, it did have the voice acting, and the main characters were pretty well done. A lot of the NPCs sound pretty weak, and even now with the PC release having the voice acting retroactively patched back in, there's a lot of translation updates and changes that they've made to the game over the time that don't match up with the voiced dialogue anymore. So between stuff like that and the new voiced Adol lines, I really feel like the chances of a retranslation is very likely. And if that's the case, I think NIS America have just as much, if not more of a chance than Xseed at being the ones who are translating this version of the game. If a retranslation and redub do happen to happen, that means we could be looking at another year to 2 years for this version to release. Not really the end of the world, since the game is available and like Falcom fans should be used to waiting by now, but it would still be nice to see if we could get this port in a timely manner for once. Now, onto the probably more interesting topic, let's talk about East 10 Nordics. For East 10, we'll be returning to a much younger Adol in his earlier years of his adventuring time. A little bit of a shame since I do like seeing Adol age and grow from game to game, but at the end of the day, it's not really that important. Each game is just basically an excuse to turn this ginger kid into the messiah of another culture. We'll be exploring and adventuring around the northern seas Obelia Bay and encountering a clan of people known as the Normans, who, based off the name of the game and Ys's past history, I imagine will be very Viking and Nordic in nature. And it seems like the main threat in this game is a unmortal undead group known as the Griegers. What's much more important than the story for most Ys games, however, is its general exploration and combat. They already said in past interviews when they were first teasing Ys 10 that they wanted to do a system that was different to the party system that they've been using for the past 4 games now. Something that I was very happy to hear since I was getting a little bit tired of the party system and felt like Ys needed something to make itself feel more fresh again. However, I was also being a little bit cautiously optimistic after one of the developers talking in an interview about the game happened to mention Dark Souls when talking about the combat. Which, while I do love Dark Souls, it's not exactly the feel I want in a arcadey action RPG setting. However, Falcom interviews have been misleading in the past. I know with Kuro no Kiseki, for example, they said a lot of stuff about this new action combat system that a lot of people got worried about, and it turned out just to be an evolution of the battle engagement system that it already had. And it really feels like that Dark Souls comment back in June is a very similar situation to this, as judging purely based off the screenshots, it seems like the gameplay hasn't changed all that much, though I suspect that the feel of it probably has. Ys 8 and 9 have a very loose and free-flowing combat system, and a lot of the time that's very fun, but it can also feel a little slippery at times, and based off the screenshots, it seems mostly the same in Ys 10, however, I feel like that Dark Souls comment was probably purely just talking about maybe making everything a little bit tighter and more constrained and less over the top and flashy. But putting all of that aside, what actually has changed for Ys 10? Well, the press release says it's got this new cross-action system that allows the player to fight using 2 different modes depending on the situation. A speedy solo mode where a player controls one character whilst the other is controlled by an AI partner, and a new combination mode where the player takes control of both characters at the same time. Now, one thing I've noticed is character switching definitely still seems to be there, so controlling Adol by himself and controlling the new girl by herself both seem like different solo playstyles that you can do. So character switching seems to have returned, as well as the skill system from the party games if you look at the icons here. I think what's changed now though is instead of having a party of 3, you can only have an active party of 2, and in fact it might just be that Adol and this new girl are the only 2 playable characters in the entire game. However, on that front we can only speculate. I just want Falcom to let me play as Dogi again, damn it. But I think this drastic change that this system has compared to the old games is that I can no longer see anything like the slash, pierce and smash damage types on enemies, so that's probably been scrapped and gone. And it seems like Falcom are trying to freshen up the series with this new combat feel I theorized about, as well as this combination mode. And from much as I can tell about this combination mode, I feel like it's probably something very similar to The World Ends With You or Castlevania Portrait of Ruin of all things. Something that was very noticeable to me is that when they were in combination mode, there is a different colour behind the skill grid now. Meaning that I imagine you've got a brand new set of skills that you can only use when you and your partner are teamed up together as one. The thing that really interests me though is below the health bar and skill points, but to the left of your skills, is this new revenge meter. The press release haven't mentioned anything about it, but it's got a multiplier to the side of it, and it's the same shade of orange as the combination skill menu. So my assumption is this is a damage multiplier for when you're in combination mode, or at least for when you're using the combination mode skills. And based off the extra gauge from the party system Ys games as a past example, I can very much see the general game flow of this game being you use solo mode and switch between the 2 characters to build up your revenge meter, where then you can switch into combination mode once that meter has gotten high enough and start cashing it out for really big damage against bosses and such. Purely just off this speculation, it does seem like it could be a very fun combat system, and I imagine that some people probably have worries about the combination mode of using 2 characters at the same time, but I really can't see it getting that complicated. It's not going to be like The World Ends With You. It is an Ys game, and at the end of the day, their entire motto is having a low skill floor so anybody can pick up and play, and then having that really high skill ceiling on the harder difficulties for those who really want to master its systems. Something else the press release talks about is a new special ability known as Mana Action, which significantly expands the degree of freedom on fields and in dungeons. Now, this isn't anything we really see much of in the UI, but what I think this is stuff like this one screenshot of Adol using a grappling hook to get across a gap, and this one screenshot of the new girl riding a hoverboard. These really feel like the new versions of what Ys 9 had with the monstrum abilities of instead of gliding or being able to zip line or run up walls, now we have this grappling hook to get across gaps and this hoverboard, allowing for this new mechanic from Ys 9 whilst also toning down on it a little bit like I suspected from that Dark Souls comment, as stuff like using a grappling hook isn't quite as over the top as zip lining to pretty much anywhere you want in the map. And a hoverboard to get around quickly and maybe jump a far distance is definitely a little bit toned down compared to the ability to just straight up glide from really high points. But the monstrum abilities were very fun to traverse that city with, and I imagine these new mana actions will help speed up just general exploration and also just make it a little bit more fun and more involved than simply running from point A to point B, which is certainly a welcome thing. The final thing we got a screenshot of and the press release talked about is the new ship exploration and combat. My first thought upon seeing of which was, my god, they're giving us a game where Adol can pilot a boat. Something that man does not have a very good history with. Now, while this press release does mostly come across as marketing talk, as it probably should do because it was for a shareholder meeting, but there was one part of it that I did appreciate, and that was that this new ship stuff is to add to the joy of adventure that the series is known for. And I'm really glad that this is something that Falcom are explicitly saying that they're going for, because even though it was kind of the point of Ys 9 with Adol being nailed down and instead thoroughly exploring the innards of a city opposed to vast landscapes and caves and dungeons, I still really wouldn't want that to be every or multiple Ys games going forward. I enjoyed it as a one-off, but I wouldn't want to see any more of it. And adventuring to and fro island to island on a big pirate ship definitely sounds like a lot of fun. Viking ship? Sailing a big pirate ship is just fun. I mean, it did a lot for the Assassin's Creed series to the point where they made multiple games based around it, and it was probably one of the funnest side distractions in Kingdom Hearts 3. And also, while it's been a while and it's probably not quite as good as I remember it being, it was one of the more enjoyable parts of Sly 3 Honor Amongst Thieves to me, so I'm definitely looking forward to it. And on one final note, I just want to say that this game visually is looking very nice. I'm incredibly glad that Falcom has managed to get that proprietary engine sorted out, because a lot of those earlier 3D titles that they were doing were really not standing up presentation wise. Them using that little bit of cell shading has really done a lot to make those colors really pop, whilst also making the game feel a little less clean and sterile, which those early HD games definitely had a bit of a problem with. But yeah, that's just about it really. The new Ys 10 looks really promising, and the remaster of Felghana is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about these two announcements. But how are you guys feeling about it? Are you guys excited too, or are you worried about anything? Are you desperately waiting for that Ys 5 remake because it's the only one that hasn't got one? Or are you just waiting for the updated art of Sister Nell from Felghana because Falcom have given you a crippling nun fetish?